Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we're doing one of those little split episodes where I just got more to say than fits into one. So last time around, we were talking about what that YouTuber did with that little bit in the popular Netflix show Squid Game, where he went back to one pivotal moment in the show and was like, hey, look at this, circle this one detail, check that out. That was in plain sight the whole time, and it answers all the questions you have about the plot. Likewise, Jesus is doing that with one key passage in the Old Testament to show the Sadducees who are criticizing him in Matthew chapter 22 that the answer to their question about life after death and how the resurrection works was right in front of them the whole time. We're picking it up right where we left off on that conversation. So the way we do this is Jeff plays music and then we jump right back in. So he lays all of that stuff out in a way that should make sense to everybody in the conversation as to what he's driving at. But then, as promised, he pivots to one key point in an agreed-upon text that he thinks answers this question and that they should have caught the first time around. And that's going to be a reference back to Exodus chapter 3 and verse 6. I do not know that off the top of my head, but I see it in my notes right here. So he says, "But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." All right, so by the time we get to Exodus chapter 3, Exodus is the second book of the Bible, second book of the Old Testament. And if you recall from our conversation about the Sadducees, the people on the other side of the conversation from Jesus here, you will remember that they were real high on the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, the Torah. They thought that this stuff was reliable and that everything after that, though it looks like they believed it was from God and worthwhile, they didn't weight it the way they weighted these first 5 books, which they would call the law and which they would say is sufficient for everything they would need to accomplish in terms of interpreting and applying the law. So we get a situation here in Exodus chapter 3 where the Exodus story is shaping up. Israel has ended up under the oppressive rule of the pharaohs. They went from being honored guests to slaves, being forced to build with bricks that are just pretty much made of mud, and they're not given reliable building materials, and they're getting whipped and beat on. And along comes Moses through this really wild birth narrative where he gets put in this basket and floated downstream and gets raised not as one of the Israelite slaves, but in the court of the pharaohs. And then some stuff goes down and Moses goes out into the wilderness, and there he gets married. And while he is out tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, he has this encounter with God in this bush that catches on fire, but the fire doesn't consume the bush. And from the bush, as strange as this might sound, the voice of God speaks and says, "Moses, Moses." And Moses says, "Here I am." "Don't come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for this place where you're standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then God goes on to spell out what the plan is going to be for Moses, how the Exodus thing is going to unfold, at least loosely. And this is the beginnings of the covenant that God makes with Moses that we've talked about so much here. The covenant that says, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people, and everybody's going to know that I'm the one true God, because if you obey me, I'll bless you in front of everybody, and if you disobey me, I will punish you in front of everybody. And so put yourself in the shoes of the Sadducees when it comes to this passage. How much are you going to worry about that opening sentence? Like, take off your sandals, holy ground. You're going to quit listening right there because you're like, oh yeah, it's holy ground. And that holy ground is an authority that we mentally confer to all of our judgments based on the law that will proceed from the mouth of the Lord coming next over the course of the remaining 3.5 books of the Pentateuch that we're going to get as the law happens and how government and society and everything ought to work gets spelled out over the course of these books. And so they're just going to fixate on that. And then there's this other stuff in there that's kind of just going to be probably treated as sort of preambly. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I bet the Sadducees recited this passage again and again and again as they engaged in dialogue and political discourse and theological debate and legal debate with their opponents. I bet this was like their signature passage, like their house words on their house sigil from Harry Potter or Game of Thrones. I bet this was like their trademark tagline passage, because this tagline, this phrase, this passage would have served only to undergird their claim to historical authority and them being the true originalists when it came to interpreting the law properly, unlike these goofball, loosey-goosey Pharisees who have all their silly oral tradition which can't be trusted. And so I don't think it's an accident that Jesus takes them back to this passage. I think he takes them back to this passage to be like, well, let's talk about just a Bible passage you guys might happen to remember, the one that's on your sigil and crest, the one that is on your shield, the one that is on your logo, the one that you quote all the time, the one that you beat everybody over the head with to demonstrate just how knowledgeable and authoritative you are and how you're the ones who are truly rooted in the truth of God. In your own house sigil, in your own theme verse and tagline is contained the language that makes it abundantly clear that God is the God of the living and not the dead. I think there's a really good chance that's why he picked the passage. But even if I am dead wrong, I mean, come on, it still speaks for itself. Again, Exodus 3:6, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. The language indicates that he is the God of those people, not that he was the God of those people. And as we talked about a couple of days ago, Matthew 17, the account of the Transfiguration, has Moses, who is standing here being told by God that God is the God of all of these people in the present tense. That same Moses shows up in an afterlife expression of himself to interact with Jesus and the inner circle of disciples. You might be listening to that and you're like, isn't it possible that that just got translated a little goofy into the English and that Jesus is reading way too much into a present tense conjugation or something? I guess, is that maybe just a little bit too precise? Yeah, but you got to understand there's an ongoing Hebrew language tradition here. There's also an ongoing Greek language tradition here. And with all these different people in the room, some of whom also would have been thinking about the text in some sort of Greek or Hebrew to Aramaic because of how their brains work, you got all these different notions of language there. And the next verse says that everybody was astonished at his teaching. So it appears to me that it didn't really matter which of these original languages the people in the original audience were thinking of the text in. It apparently worked in all of them. And I really do strongly suspect that part of the awe that the crowd felt was that Jesus used the Sadducees' theme verse against them. He verbally judoed them and used their own strength to defeat them. So in summary, Jesus is saying your scenario is ridiculous. Even the scenario you're presenting is wrong, because you don't understand what happens after life. You don't understand the power of God. You underestimate it dramatically. You don't understand the scriptures you claim to be so loyal to. There is resurrection of the dead. God is the God of the living and not the dead. And he says so in a verse that at the very least they were all super familiar with. And at the very most was maybe even their theme verse they used to beat people over the head with their claim to authority. And in the same way that the YouTuber made sense of the plot twists in Squid Game by pointing to one pivotal moment and being like, it was right there in front of your eyes the whole time, you all knew the scene, so Jesus closes his case by going back to one pivotal moment in the text and being like, that answers the whole question right there. It was right in front of you the whole time. And he did it in such an effective way that everybody, once again, is in awe. And next time around, I want to talk about that motif that we're seeing throughout the book of Matthew, where the crowds hear Jesus say something and they're not just like, oh, that was really good, but they are in awe at how he handled things. So we're going to go look at that and some other callbacks that I think are present in this passage before we move on from it next time around. Thanks for doing this with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.